The dust settled like a shroud over the remains of what had once been the most prosperous ranch in 3 counties. Sarah stood at the edge of the property, her threadbare dress clinging to her thin frame, watching the man who now owned nothing but the clothes on his back and the weight of his failures. James Hawthorne had been a legend once. A cattle baron, they'd called him. Now he was just another broken man in a land that specialized in breaking people. She'd been watching him for 3 days now, ever since the bank had come and taken everything. The cattle, the horses, even the furniture from inside the ranch house. They'd left him with a bedroll and his father's old rifle, and that was charity more than law. Sarah had her own reasons for being there, reasons that made her stomach churn with shame and desperation in equal measure. The Caldwell gang had her sister. They'd taken Martha 6 months ago, and every day that passed was another day closer to losing her forever. The gang operated out of the old mining territory up north, a lawless stretch of territory where even the marshals feared to tread. Sarah had tried everything. She'd begged the sheriff, offered every penny she had to hired guns, even attempted to ride up there herself before being turned back by terrain and fear. But she needed someone who had nothing left to lose, someone who might be desperate enough to help her for the only thing she had left to offer. James Hawthorne was that man. She approached him as he sat on the porch steps of his empty house, staring at the horizon as if it might offer him some answer to questions he hadn't yet formed. He didn't look up when her shadow fell across him, didn't acknowledge her presence until she spoke. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, already thick with the shame of what she was about to propose. He turned slowly, his eyes hollow and distant. Up close, she could see the lines that grief and failure had carved into his face. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, but he looked ancient in the way that only profound loss could age a man. "I need your help," she continued, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "My sister was taken by the Caldwell gang. She's been gone 6 months. I need someone to help me get her back." James laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "Do I look like I'm in a position to help anyone, miss?" "You look like a man who has nothing left to lose," Sarah replied, and something in her directness seemed to penetrate the fog of his despair. "I can't pay you. I have no money, no property, nothing of value except—" She paused, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Myself." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and desperation. James stood slowly, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to flee. But she held her ground, because Martha was worth any sacrifice, any degradation. "You don't know what you're offering," he said quietly. "And you don't know me." "I know you were married once," Sarah said. "I know your wife died 2 years ago giving birth to a son who didn't survive the night. I know you threw yourself into building this ranch, making it into an empire, because work was easier than grief. And I know the bank took it all 3 days ago because you'd mortgaged everything to buy more land, more cattle, trying to fill a hole that couldn't be filled with acreage and livestock." James's jaw tightened. "You've been asking about me. I needed to know if you were the kind of man who might help me. And if you were the kind of man I could trust with what I'm offering." "Trust," James repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Lady, I couldn't save my own wife and child. I couldn't save my ranch. What makes you think I can save your sister?" "Because now you have a reason to," Sarah said, taking a step closer. "I'm not asking you to care about Martha. I'm not asking you to care about me. I'm asking you to help me because I'll give you whatever you want in return. Companionship, comfort, use of my body. Whatever you need to forget your pain, even if it's just for a while. I'll be whatever you need me to be if you'll just help me get my sister back." The desperation in her voice was raw and unfiltered, and James felt something crack inside his chest at the sound of it. This woman was offering to sell herself, not for money or security, but for love of her sister. It was the kind of sacrifice that reminded him there were still things in the world worth fighting for, even if he'd lost all of his own. "The Caldwell gang," he said finally. "They're killers. Even if we could get to their camp, even if we could somehow get your sister out, they'd hunt us down. We'd be running for the rest of our lives." "Then we run," Sarah said simply. "At least we'd be alive. At least I'd have tried. Right now, I'm dying slowly, knowing she's up there, knowing what they're probably doing to her, and being completely powerless to stop it. James looked at her for a long moment, this desperate woman with wild eyes and a courage born of hopelessness. He thought about the empty house behind him, about the silent nights stretching ahead with nothing but memories and regrets for company. He thought about his wife, about the promises he'd made to always protect her, promises he'd failed to keep. Maybe he couldn't save the people he'd loved, but maybe he could save this one woman's sister. Maybe that could be enough to give his remaining days some purpose. "I don't want your body," he said quietly, and watched her face fall with confusion and fear that he was rejecting her entirely. "But I won't lie and say the loneliness doesn't eat at me. If we do this, if we go after your sister, I want honesty between us. No transactions, no dates. You want help, and I need a reason to keep breathing. Maybe we can give each other that." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been prepared to debase herself, to become whatever he wanted, and instead he was offering her something that looked almost like partnership. It was more than she'd hoped for, more than she deserved. "Hold me then," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Use me. Just get me out of here. Get Martha out of that camp and take us somewhere safe. I don't care where, I don't care how hard the journey is. Just get us out of this nightmare." James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against his chest, her body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for 6 months. He held her while she cried, this stranger who'd offered him herself and been given back her humanity instead. They stood like that for a long time, two broken people holding each other up in the ruins of his former life. When Sarah finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clear, focused with new determination. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Dawn," James replied. "I've got a horse they somehow missed in the seizure, Old Red. He can carry us both if we don't push too hard. We'll need supplies. Do you have anything?" "I have a rifle and about $30, Sarah said. "And I can ride and shoot. My father made sure of that before he passed." James nodded, seeing her with new respect. "We'll need to be smart about this. The Caldwell gang has maybe 20 men. We can't fight them head-on. We'll need to scout their camp, find out where they're keeping your sister, and get her out quietly. If we're lucky, we'll have a day's head start before they even realize she's gone. And if we're not lucky, then we fight like hell and hope we're faster than they are," James said with a grim smile. "You sure about this? Once we start, there's no turning back." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I've been sure since the day they took her. I just needed someone willing to stand with me." That night, they prepared for the journey ahead. James gathered what little he had left: ammunition, a knife, rope, a canteen. Sarah returned with her own supplies, and they laid out their plans by lamplight in the empty ranch house. As the hours wore on and exhaustion began to claim them, Sarah reached out and took James's hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not making this something ugly. For treating me like a person instead of a transaction." James squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for reminding me there are still things worth fighting for. I thought I'd lost that when they took my ranch. But maybe fighting for someone else's family can help me make peace with losing my own." They fell asleep there on the floor of the empty house, hands still clasped together, two desperate souls finding comfort in shared purpose and the promise of action after too long spent in helpless grief. When dawn broke over the horizon, they rode north toward the mining territory, toward the Caldwell gang, toward an uncertain future that somehow felt less terrifying than the certain despair they were leaving behind. Sarah sat behind James on Old Red, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Whatever came next, they would face it together.